Hello, everyone. My name is Tina Ada. I work in marketing for Hitachi Industrial Equipment and Solutions America. Welcome to our June 2021 webinar. Today's topic in our free Hitachi webinar series will be logistic mistakes when adding in production line equipment and how to avoid them. Before we start, I'd like to go over some quick housekeeping items. First, just wanted to let everyone know this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on demand. So please feel free to share with your colleagues if they were unable to attend today. Second, this is meant to be a discussion and we'll be stopping throughout the webinar to answer questions. So we'd like you to type your questions into the Q&A box at any time. We'll answer as many as we can during this session. Last, this will be a 30-minute webinar, so we'll be mindful of your time to stay within that window. I'm very excited to have this opportunity to gain knowledge with you all and really dive deep into this topic live with industry experts. We have Peter Lindström-Son, Director of Marketing and Coding here at Hitachi, and Robert Champion-Son, President of Inaflex Solutions. So with all that being said, I will pass the mic to Peter-Son, who will be driving the conversation topics today. So Peter-Son, over to you.
Thank you, Tina. This is a very exciting thing for me to do. Our guest today, Robert Champion, he and I worked together on and off for the better part of 20 years. We were design partners building packaging machinery and putting together packaging lines. And later in our careers, he was my customer. So it brings me great pleasure to have my colleague and friend to come and chat with us and share some thoughts really on some common mistakes. Robert, please take it away.
Yeah. Hi, Peter. Good afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. Today audience in Hitachi. Thanks for inviting me. As Peter said, known Peter for a few years and enjoy our relationship and this webinar today. I think it's going to be fruitful for us. And as we look forward into going into 2021, I think we should talk about what we're faced against. So what this webinar sets the precedent. So can I have the next slide, please? And essentially what we're looking at as far as the baseline for this webinar is the industry impact to us as food processors and CPGs and OEMs, and consumers are pulling. There's more of a demand for products, more options. There's more of a variety, nostalgia. There's more of a clean label too. What do we want? What's on the label that people are reading, and companies need to be able to switch to address those pulls. So, and the good news is it's happening fast. It may be good news or bad news, but it's happening quicker. So how do we react to that? It's really what this is all about. So we don't have mistakes that prohibit you from meeting the demands of your customers. So with that, I like to get into our first area of compromise. I'll call it our first mistake, or I'm going to call it an opportunity, but it's our first mistake we want to avoid. And that is organizational structures of internal people within your organizations. External also play a very important part on your success to deliver to the market needs. And we're talking about culture, talent, sustainability goals that you may have as a food and beverage company, and your OEMs need to understand that so they can match it. Your short and long-term goals, that's key. Sometimes we don't share what the goals are, if it's a 1 year or 18 months or a 3-year goal, and how that impacts your product innovation and renovations plans to get those goods into the distribution channels. And I think people are a very important part on understanding who knows what, who doesn't know what, and how do you find those gaps possibly to minimize those potential issues that will prohibit you from being successful.
Hey, Robert, I have a question specific actually to point number 2. It's not like there's a blog or a website or let's say an Angie's List in air quotes that would allow someone to find out about any gaps in technical capability or the capability of execution of a seller. How does that work? I mean, that's a point on here that how do you solve that?
Yeah, that's a key point that I think is oftentimes overlooked until there's a problem. A delay in an FAT, a delay in a site acceptance test, or poor performance in operations, which is like, you don't want that you live with those unfavorable costs. So to answer that, Peter, what I'm going to dive into in this webinar are really 5 cornerstones. I'm going to call them enablers for success. And we need to start sharing what that looks like as far as people, capabilities, and skill sets, looking at the materials that the production line is planning to run, and the packaging materials and product. Also, we're going to call it the modes of operation, which is a big piece, and I'll get into that a little bit later. And then I'm going to say the 5th bucket is logistics. So when you start putting these 5 together, they're really areas you want to start asking questions as far as if you're the selling or the requesting company, a food and beverage company. Really, are you sharing enough of your baseline conditions in those 5 areas with your partner? If you're an external partner, which we're the CPG looking at an OEM, say in this case, I'm looking at their gaps and capabilities. Do they understand our industry? And do they have the talent to deliver in these 5 areas, or where the weaknesses are? And that's like a starting point when you start talking about CapEx investments or OpEx, which is operational improvement. So those are areas that today oftentimes get overlooked, and they show up. They show up in your efficiency on your production floor.
So a firm such as Inaflex would be a good tool to use to help with this.
Yeah, what we found, Peter, is overall in the industry, the food and beverage companies have strong engineering teams. They have strong external third-party engineering teams. But oftentimes the data will show us, the unbiased data that's out there will show you that most projects are probably 50 to 60% successful on cost, time. And then if you start looking at OpEx, the cost variance, meeting your targets, that's another conversation. So what we do a little differently in players like us, we uncover those, we go deep into those 5 areas to really bring solutions that help you create sustainable processes, to be aware of your baseline, and when it gets away from baseline, how to bring it back in so you don't have these unfavorable costs and not, again, meet your consumer and customer goals. So yes, we can help with that. Any other thoughts on that, Peter?
I'm good with that. I think we have maybe a question or two.
Yes, we actually had a question pop up here. How does diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, impact teams and operational excellence and success?
That's a very good question from the audience. It's not a task you just check the box off just to be compliant. I would say it's bigger than that. It's getting different opinions, different viewpoints from the demographics you're selling into or trying to grow within, and getting perspectives that are more organic and not monolithic with just one type of thinking. And it helps you reduce it's been proven to help you to reduce your project execution time. It helps solve problems quicker and faster because different demographics of people think differently, different age groups think differently. And what you have is this morale that you want sustaining your organization, because as we talk a little bit later in the following slides, when you look at operations and you look at your business, it's the people that are going to be kind of cornerstone to champion just the diversity of thought, decision-making, and it's a benefit to the business overall. I personally have been involved in organizations where diversity was just a byproduct of how they did things. And it was just not something you had to force and do. It was just made the organization a great place to work. It made it an exciting collaboration with your team, and the results for the business drivers were met better. Great question. Okay, any other questions on that one? That's great.
Like there are no further questions right now. I think it would be okay to move forward.
Okay, let's go into our next area. And again, before I go into the second and third slide, we're not going to be able to go real deep like I'm, as an engineer want to go deep, but this is going to be enough top level substance so we get a flavor of what's out there. So Peter, we talked about people. People are important, internal, external. Yes. Okay. Now in operations, what happens in operations really is understanding what you're planning to do, and are you doing it, and do you have methods in place to gauge it, right? So I'm not going to get deep on tools, but do you know if your line's running well or not running well? So let's look at new lines. There's going to be a lot of new lines coming on board today because the market is driving for variation of SKUs, product styles, and desires of the market. But brownfield, there's more installations than there are on new lines and new facilities. So how do we address those hybrid situations so that we can have efficient operations and be able to deliver the cost goals and profit goals that we want? So we need to eliminate the micro and minor stoppages. So when I talked about earlier in the 5 areas, those 5 building blocks enablers, micro stops are going to be a byproduct of those 5 areas. Yeah, you will see hiccups, that data showing micro stop issues because of inefficient things happening in those 5 core areas. And then again, shifts, all shifts are not equal. So you have your great running shifts, and then you have that odd shift that, wow, it's just not really running well, but you know what, I don't need to pay attention to it. But maybe that's an opportunity. So I would say understanding your operations is a opportunity for potentially maybe some more growth.
Just the title on this makes me scratch my head and really ask, how could one not understand what's going on in their own operation or their own factory? Or is it that maybe I already know, if I'm a factory manager, I have my KPIs and I have the things that I want to do. Is it possible that maybe I'm missing something, and lost potential, sort of?
Yeah, that's a good question, Peter, because we all think we know what we know relative to our operations until there's a demand for more. So when you're running and meeting your volume planning, there's really no reason to think that things are not okay. Yeah, you're meeting your numbers. You would like more, but you're meeting your demand. I think the opportunity is relative to, let's just take the pandemic. With the pandemic happening and the shift from institutional and restaurant eating and consuming to more retail packs because people were home, that put a pressure point on a lot of food and beverage companies to be able to deliver more volume off those lines for retail. So they utilized the first and second shift, right, primarily to do that. And the third shift was, okay, we're getting some volume. Maybe it was used for R&D development work, some new stuff for innovation, throw it on third shift, or some trials and errors, trials to improve improvements on product development. But the pandemic forced the need for the third shift. So, but even before we talk to third shift, there's some unutilized capacity, untapped, because of minor and micro stoppages that we need to address in those 5 core areas. And that's really the issue when you talk about understanding your operations is, are you making 100 packs per minute? Let's use that as a baseline. That's the gold standard. And you really are at 85 or 90. So the question is, why can I not get to 100? And then you start diving below in those 5 core areas and they're primarily in modes of operation, those 5 areas, to figure out how to minimize stoppages in those 5 core areas. You may not do them all, but it's a source and seek, right? And so there's an opportunity when there's a demand for you to do more, but there's some great companies that are proactive, that have continuous improvement. And that's the message I want to get out to the food and beverage companies and the OEMs, is there needs to be some form of continuous improvement, but because you're busy producing product and your engineering teams are staffed and your maintenance teams are staffed and booked out, you need someone to help you look at that and to be a continuous back end, providing that input into your upstream teams so that you won't get stuck again with that 10 products per minute that you didn't realize. So I think we should go after that, Peter.
In most cases, I've been to numerous CPGs where third shift, wasn't as good as first or second shift. Is third shift normally used strictly just to make up volume, or is it really important? Is it really important in that respect?
Yeah, it's a good question. For most mid-sized, large companies, third shift is important, especially today. In today's culture, we move from, the production window cycle, let's just talk CapEx, used to be 18 months, 2 years from inception, conception of a brand, product, or renovation or an innovation of a product, to buying the capital equipment, to installing it, to starting it up. That was the old paradigm. Today, I think the hybrid model is like 12 months. It's like you need to be ready. So how do you squeeze this time out of the technical value system of your third-party engineering firms, your OEMs, your internal engineering teams, so that you can be in business quicker for CapEx? So in normal operations, to answer your existing operations, Peter, to answer your question, third shift is important for a lot of reasons. It allows you to be able to do maintenance on some lines, and you could, use that as a buffer to pick up some volume or some changeovers. Some lines are designed when you're doing changeovers to use that, the third shift for some of that to pick up some of that volume. But third shift really, it goes back to, we talk about those 5 areas. You find that your numbers are lower as far as throughput, because maybe we don't have a good control on our material. We don't have good control on our product baseline. Our training on our operators are not at peak optimal. They're not our A players in running the lines. And then, maybe when we look at logistics, we're doing some things as far as running different SKU sizes, or we're running, small batches, et cetera. It causes a lot of noise. So all this noise, especially with the pressure today to be quicker, be more nimbler, you got to have these lines that are more excellent as far as producing. They need to produce at the 100 a minute, not the 90. And third shift just gives you that opportunity. It's not like I would say, a buffer in a sense. You want the volume on the line, because you're paying that cost variance. You want to make sure you get the return on it, not just for an idle line not producing.
Tina, are there any questions?
So we had a question come up on the third point. Where is the best or easiest place to start to reduce efficiency draggers? And is it the shift review or on a new specific line?
So the question is, in general, I think it's in multiple areas. So let's talk about CapEx. So let's talk about efficiency draggers. Peter, we talked about earlier, as far as the, operate people and, understanding talent level, right? Internal or external. And so it starts with understanding those 5 enablers. And then what's the baseline of those 5 enablers? So let's just take materials. So if materials are, I'm not gonna get too deep here. Let's just take corrugate on a case packer. If the specifications on the structural geometry of that case drawing, blank material, is known, and all the different variables are known on it, and we input that in the design side to the case packer company, if it's a CapEx, and then now it's in operations, we translate that to our standards and operational procedures. We have that documented in our HMI, somewhere that you can quickly find, when it's out of balance, and check it and get it back in balance. You'll find that that would eliminate that dragger. So that downtime efficiency dragger. But typically, I would say that your draggers, the equipment will do what it's designed to do. I think it's not knowing your people and your materials, because your equipment, you can adapt the equipment to monitor those variables if you know what they are.
I have a follow-up question to the audience question, and you brought up the point of corrugate, and I'll just, for lack of a better term, use tolerances. Different roles in companies do different things, and procurement is always trying to get a cheaper price. I've seen it, and I don't know how to battle it, when procurement goes and orders 50,000 cases because they were the cheapest and they're out of spec, and you still have to run them. This wreaks havoc on a production line, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, but that's part of the normal. Let's say it can be the new normal or the normal. Let's just call it the normal. So I think the first question, and piggyback to your question, Peter, I think it all starts with, you start at the baseline. You start off with documented standard procedures and baseline conditions. And then what's the variation from that? So that goes back in this section here about the rhythm of the line. Peter, I'm going to talk about the rhythm of the line. So when you walk a production floor, from processing through packaging, that particular line has a sound. It has a cadence to it. When it opens a case, it has a cadence. When it puts product in the case and seals it and glues it and it comes out, it has a rhythm. So when you can, if you spend a little time in a factory or plant, you begin to hear normal and abnormal. So your ears hear it and your eyes see it, but you don't know when it really happened or what was the root cause of the problem. So, the equipment can help us with that if we understand what the variables are on the product and the material. You can input that into the design phase with the OEM, or if it's a brownfield installation already in operations, you get your supplier engaged. You talked about talent level, and you talk through these variables so that they can design for it, right? And that talks about innovation and renovation. How much of that can you design for? There's a threshold. But I think oftentimes we don't do the basic stuff first. It's going to always evolve, right? We're going to always go cheaper. I'm going to call it more economical, but not at the expense of poor quality or poor performance. That's where the message gets awry. And again, our internal procurement teams, our marketing and sales teams, engineering teams, we talked about people. We all need to be on the same page, but if engineering, let's say, is a driver, engineering has to be able to share out up around itself these capabilities of the external suppliers, internal standards and specifications, back to marketing and sales. So when they input for a new innovation, you're not there trying to figure it out for 3 or 4 months. You already kind of an idea of what the capabilities could be because you're now talking these 5 enablers along the journey. And I think that's an opportunity kind of miss when we talked about the capabilities. So good question. I don't know if I answered. Did I answer your question, Peter? Did I answer the audience question? Or is there a follow-up from the audience? Those are great questions.
There are no further questions from the audience right now.
Okay. So we're going to go to our third slide. And this one is about the business, right? So we talked about people, operations, but the business, the brand is what's key, right? So it's about aligning those 5 enablers with what the business wants to do. And, how are we aligning the production lines for flexibility? And what's the need for flexibility? And Peter, you just talked about that earlier. You're already on this slide. Base conditions, you can use digitalization to track and trend for running conditions and mode of operations, run mode, what's going on with that production line and make a decision on it before it fails or before you have a lot of micro and minor stoppages that won't let you reach the 90 products per minute. So here, material variances and product variances are just, they're draggers. We talked about the other slide that will not enable you to be high performers. So marketing and sales are really asking when they go to engineering and engineering goes to their external OEMs, they're asking, what are the capabilities? And Peter, we talked about the last slide, that third shift and being able to be a little excellent on the third shift to do some innovation on there, right? Do some undercover, innovation before you, do real putting in your production floor, your main lines. You can do some trials and tests on that third shift line, but we need to understand the capabilities. But what happens a lot of times is there's a lot of noise. The line stoppages are caused because of one of those 5 areas. People didn't understand what was, why the line stopped. They didn't understand the material was out of spec. They didn't understand the product was not the right temperature, or was some misconfiguration of the container, or the line sequence of operation somehow is not, running the way that it should as you designed it to run. And that's going back from the modes of operation, sequence operation, to the unit operation of the actual asset. So here is where we're really trying to facilitate volume into the market. And we're not going to be able to do it successfully unless we understand the 5 draggers that are holding down the line.
So I know this is kind of a question that everybody in every walk of life is asking, but what has the COVID-19 pandemic taught us, if anything, around these points?
Yeah, it's great. That's great. I would say for sure, the customers I've talked to and in the industry, It's they need to be able to machine diagnostics or problem solving. So COVID said, you can't go into our facility. You're going to have to help us solve the problem through Google Glasses, HoloLens, or some sort of digitalization. That kind of drove that technology. It pulled it forward to be accepted. What it taught us is that the things we said we couldn't do because of needing to physically be in someone's space, we could do through digitalization, meaning that we can use some of the devices that are already on the equipment that are designed with the information already in them. We can tap that out. All right, we can tap it out to some sort of a device, HMI or iPhone or iPad, to make decisions, see tracks and trends, or it could be for maintenance. You can see when to intervene for maintenance on a more precise schedule versus guessing and planning. You could be more precise and reduce your costs. But what the pandemic has shown us is that, I'm going to go back to, I think, the operations piece, our second slide, is that we need to be able to deliver and be more, enable our business to deliver and pivot quicker, and that we need to do it faster. And what we found was that businesses struggle to do it because the faster you ran, the less you got out the lines. Because the design in the 5 areas, something was missing. Either materials were just way out of spec, or the line, the connected pieces of equipment didn't actually run the way they should, running a little bit faster to get more out. Remember those first 2 shifts, the third shift now comes into play. And what it taught us is that we need to always continuously be improving, a continuous improvement on our performance on our assets, and that get the 100% out of it instead of settling for the 85 to 90. And it's not always easy to do, but again, that missed opportunity is, do we understand those 5 key areas where the opportunity lies?
Awesome. Tina, are there any questions?
Yes, there's one. Is there a threshold a company should have in place for material or product variances, so marketing knows when an idea is now becoming cost prohibitive?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's almost like an open-ended question. It depends on, but I'll answer it this way. There are some, I'd say some deviations from standard I would look at. Yeah, so I'll give you some rough ideas. And so let's talk about construction on materials. Just stiffness of materials versus versus a flexible material, right? So, how the elasticity of materials are one, right? I'm just giving you some overall goals, but if you want to talk about how that impacts the production line and pieces of equipment, I would estimate from my experience, if the materials are causing you, if you were able to define that material as being a cause of your minor stoppages, A, and B, if that's equating to anywhere of 0.5% to 0.75% of causing downtime per hour, I would address it. Because if you start adding that up, pieces of equipment, you'll end up with packaging system somewhere in the low single digits of unplanned downtime that drag that 100% number down to that 90% on products per minute.
I know we're up against the clock here, Robert.
Okay.
But I have a kind of a final wrap-up question that I would like to ask. Of the 3 slides that were gone over today, which one carries the most value or has the most benefit to companies?
Yeah, that's a great question. I struggle with that, but I know the answer from my perspective. I say it's people, because people will drive the technology and people will drive the operations. I think it's making sure talent is there and understanding your operations, translating that internally and externally, and to help make decisions and change the paradigm. So, having that conversation with your suppliers is important. So I think it's people, Peter.
Awesome. If there are, Tina, are there any other questions?
There are no other questions right now.
Okay, since there's no other question, Robert, I just want to say it was great having you here today. And I want to thank you and our attendees for stopping by, because at Hitachi, and we and our channel partners continually strive to provide knowledge and some resources so that, our common clients can succeed.
Yeah.
Robert, you can be reached how?
Yeah, you can reach me at, innoflexsolutions.com. That's our website. And personally, you can reach out to me at robert.champion@innoflexsolutions.com. Phone number 440-665-5987. And I appreciate this time. It went by fast.
Ed.
Couldn't get into a lot of detail, but my goodness, this is great stuff. Hopefully it helps people because I think there's value here.
If anybody wants more detail, they can send you an email.
Sure.
Send
Yeah,
me-
reach out to us. We'll gladly go into more detail and discuss those 5 areas that maybe can help you uncover some potential for yourself. So thank you for inviting me, Hitachi. I really enjoyed it.
And I
Thank
just wanted to thank you again, Peter Sun and Robert Sun, for your time and sharing with us your knowledge today. And thank you to all our attendees for tuning in today and for your questions and participation. We're so glad that you could attend this webinar, and please keep an eye out for an email sharing the recording of this webinar. And as always, we'll be creating a webinar aid, so that will provide quick tips on all that was discussed today. And before we close out, we'd like to share that our next webinar will cover the use of technology on your production floor. We're really excited about this topic and feel it's especially important as we navigate through this post-COVID world. So please be on the lookout and make sure you register for our upcoming webinar. Thank you again, and remember, Hitachi's knowledge is always there to help you succeed. My name is Tina Ada, and thank you for joining.